Thank you. Thank you. That was very kind of you. And thank you, all of you, for coming to listen to me today. I appreciate it very much. If at any point it gets too cold and you want to have a little walk around, then don't worry. I'm not going to think you're rude if you want to have a little walk around. So that's fine. I'm going to talk for probably about 40 minutes. I can talk a lot, so if I'm going too long, just give me the signal right now. But I'll talk for about 40 minutes, and then afterwards we'll have like a little question and answer, and then afterwards we'll have a little bit of food, and we can do some mingling and chatting and stuff as well. So it should be a really nice few hours that we have ahead of us. It's the first time I've done a talk with gloves on as well, actually, so see if that changes anything. I'm going to talk about a variety of different things, but I think it's really important just to tell you a little bit about me to begin with, so you have an idea of who I am, why I care about these issues, and I suppose what's led me to thinking the way I do about activism and different things that we might talk about later as well. So it's no surprise, I'm sure, to anyone else here that I wasn't born in a vegan family, right? Was anyone here born vegan? Right. Very, very rare, right? Like, so no, I am definitely not the exception either. I wasn't born into a vegan family, certainly not. I was born into a family that used to think that vegetarians were crazy. Well, they still do, actually. We used to laugh about being vegetarian when I was growing up. We used to sit around the dinner table, my stepdad, he always made the same joke. And it's not a funny joke by any stretch of the imagination. But he always made the same joke. He'd always go, oh, you know, Ed, what's the best thing about having a vegetarian around for dinner? And then I would start laughing to myself, and I'd say, oh, it means that everyone else gets more meat, right? Because, you know, hilarious, right? Yeah. It's just so baffling. My stepdad still says to me today, he says he's keeping cardboard boxes for me, so if I ever visit, I'll have something to eat when I go back. I never go back, right? Surprise, surprise, right? No. Because I was raised in that kind of environment. I remember being 12 years old, and I was in an English literature class, and we were studying a book. And in the book there was a vegetarian character, and so my teacher kind of asked the classroom, she was like, what do you think about being vegetarian? And so I was 12 years old and a bit kind of maybe cocky, a bit confident, so I put my hand up in the air, and my teacher was like, yes, Edward. And I said, all vegetarians are pale, weak and skinny, right? Which was, it's ironic, I was like the weakest and skinniest in the room, right? And I ate it every day, twice a day, right? Just over my head. There was a girl behind me called Natasha. Now, Natasha was a vegetarian. Here's hoping she's a vegan now, but she was a vegetarian at the time. And so I turned to look at her, thinking that she would provide some sort of validation for what I said. And instead, when I looked at her, she looked at me and she was really angry. And she was so cross. You know, it kind of actually took me aback, you know, what she looked at me like. I actually found it a little bit startling. I was a bit shocked. And so I turned from Natasha to look up at my teacher. Thinking my teacher, she was called Mrs. Townsend, thinking Mrs. Townsend, I don't know why I remember that, Mrs. Townsend would look at me, right, and at least validate what I'd said, you know, correct answer. But she looked really concerned, like she was going to get told off. And I remember that moment, I think, because it really showed to me how when we're children and we're being raised, right, we get indoctrinated with such a hardened set of values. You know, as children, we take everything that's told to us somewhat on face value, don't we? Which is important because we rely on our parents and those around us to look after us. And so what they say, we take as being true because actually what they say might might actually mean that we stay safe. You know, don't talk to this person, or don't eat that, or don't do this. About survival, isn't it? And so we take it on face value. Now, I was raised in a family being told that you needed meat for protein. And so the first time in my life where I was ever forced to actually think about it, I just said exactly what I'd been told to say by the family and environment and culture I'd been raised in. And I think that's really important. Because I remember when I started getting active, I actually became quite angry, a bit misanthropic. I mean, I think it's really important to make the point that I am still really angry. And I don't think that that's a bad thing to recognise, that we're all angry. Like, we should be angry. If we look at what's happening in the world right now, to the animals, to our planet, and even just the fact that people are tricked into these systems and industries by labels and by marketing and by advertising, we should be very, very angry about it. Like, there's no denying that. But at the same time, it's how you use that anger, isn't it? And I remember at the beginning, I used to get really angry at people that I was talking to, and I blamed them for all the problems. But that's not actually fair. Like I said, we're all products, aren't we, of the way that we're raised. And so we have to distance ourselves somewhat from seeing the person as the problem, but actually seeing the systems, the environments, the cultures, the beliefs, the values, that speciesist mentality. That's what leads people into these environments where you have good people, like my parents, hopefully, who do bad things. But not because they're bad people, but because this is the way that they've been raised in the society they've been raised in. And that moment for me, when I reflect on it, shows just how true that is. You know, how we don't think consciously, we don't think logically. We just say something without even having to critically reflect. I mean, Natasha was a lot stronger than I was, that was for sure. She could have beaten me in an arm wrestle, but I didn't reflect on that and think, oh, well, she doesn't eat meat, but she's stronger than I am. I just said what I'd been told to say. I remember now being 18 years old, so I'm 25 now, so it's 7 years ago. And I was ordering pizza with a friend. Now, I just got to university, and I had a few vegetarian friends at university. I didn't mind them being vegetarian because they never said a word to me about it. And I liked that little environment we had because they knew what I was about and I didn't care about what they were about, so it was all fine. But one day I was ordering a pizza with my friend who was vegetarian, and he said to me, he said, Ed, why don't we get one pizza, make it vegetarian, and you can have the vegetarian pizza? And I remember looking at him and saying, this is obviously some kind of joke, right? I was like, his name is Aaron, and I said, Aaron, you know me, like, it's Ed. Like, when the hell have I ever bought vegetarian food? And he said, Ed, why not? And I said, well, there's a very simple reason why not. I said, because bacon goes on pizza, doesn't it? I mean, obvious, right? And he looked at me and he said, an animal shouldn't die for a pizza topping. And I remember being really angry. I couldn't believe that he'd said that to me. And I said to him, what are you talking about? I said, what's the point in these animals if there's nothing at the end of it for us? Like, why would they even exist? And he just said he didn't think it was a very good reason. Now, he was a hypocrite because he was vegetarian, right? But at the same time, I didn't think about it. He stood his ground in that moment, and it made me really angry. I'd never been in a situation where someone was actually questioning my values. But at the same time, the first time that did happen, it made me angry. Like, I was actually quite upset by that moment, and it actually really did get to me. I was really stubborn at that time, so we got half and half instead. I still am quite stubborn, but hopefully for better reasons now, right? Now, everything did change for me about 5.5 years ago. This was the beginning of the change. It was a gradual change, I suppose. It was May 2014. I was reading the BBC online, and I came across this story. And this story was about a truck carrying 6,000 chickens crashing on the way to a slaughterhouse near a city, well, near Manchester in England. And I remember reading this story and being quite horrified, because the journalist had said that 1,500 of the birds had died from the crash alone. Now, actually, coincidentally, where the crash was is near a micro sanctuary. And so a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, 2 winters ago, I was travelling through the UK doing a university tour. And this micro sanctuary reached out to me because they knew I was going to be in Manchester. And they said, come visit, come see, because they'd rescued loads of the chickens from the crash. And they had loads of images from it. And so anyway, I was at the micro sanctuary and they were showing me these pictures from the crash. And it was just horrendous, like even worse than I remembered when I read the article. Like the conditions these animals were in, but just the suffering they were going through was so horrible. And there was just images of just chickens everywhere, dead across this road. It was quite a big thing that happened at the time, and I think that's why it got coverage. But I remember reading about it at the time and just being shocked. I couldn't believe it. Now, it's funny, isn't it? Because I don't think, well, I never did, thought about animals being driven in trucks to slaughterhouses. And I'd never considered that actually being a reality of what happens. It's funny, I was raised in a place called Yorkshire, which is northern England, and Yorkshire's a big farming county. And so if I'm ever around there now, I see trucks on the motorways all the time. But like for the first 19 years of my life, I never saw a single one, which is so funny because it just shows how cut off we are. Like even when they're there in front of us, we're not even realising what it is. Like it's absurd to think that these things are in front of us and we still have no awareness because we're so blinded potentially by our own willful ignorance, but also blinded by the fact that we're so meticulously lied to, aren't we? Anyway, this story made me realise a few things because it wasn't the dead chickens that really upset me. It was the fact there were hundreds more of them who were alive but suffering. So they had broken bones, broken wings, broken beaks, they were being crushed by the truck. And that's what really upset me, because I recognised the animals I consumed had the capacity to suffer. And I'd never thought about it before. I never thought about pigs, cows, chickens, lambs, even marine animals. I'd never thought about them being able to feel pain. Never crossed my mind. In my fridge was a KFC, and this was the big problem, because I loved fried chicken. It was my absolute favourite food was fried chicken. I had a KFC that was about a 5-minute walk from where I used to live, and 5 minutes, like, I was really close, like, dangerously close. And so I went there, like, so often, the workers knew who I was. They knew my name, Ed, obviously, and they knew my favourite order. It's called a zinger box meal. I used to get it towered up, which means you put hash brown in there, and you get it with hot wings as well. And there was the remains of that in my fridge. But at the same time, I was feeling sorry for these chickens. Now, I really hate feeling like a hypocrite. It's something that really annoys me. We live in a state of hypocrisy most of our lives, don't we? We're always doing some things, but at the same time, that feeling where you know that the way you're living or what you're doing contradicts how you feel, that's a terrible feeling. And I had that in that moment, and I'd never thought about it before. I'd never thought about it. But everything made sense to me then. And I thought, this is crazy what I'm doing. Like, this doesn't make any sense. You know, how can I carry on doing this? And it was very simple for me, really, because I'd eaten so much fried chicken, and I really liked how it tasted. But in that moment, it seemed totally irrelevant to me. And so that was the change. I only went vegetarian now. And I always say to myself, it's because I didn't know. And I always like to think that if I'd known about dairy and eggs at the same time, I'd have gone straight vegan. But I also can't be honest and say that would necessarily be true. But I went vegetarian at that point. And I was a vegetarian who thought vegans were really crazy. Like, it kind of makes me feel a bit ashamed to say it now. Like, you know, it happens with some vegetarians, right? Yeah. Where they go vegetarian and they think that, you know, that's amazing, right? And you know, fine, the mentality's changing and that's really positive. But I was one of those vegetarians who's probably a little bit arrogant, and I thought I was doing this wonderful thing. And I remember saying that vegans were crazy people. I remember saying that they were militant, which is kind of ironic, isn't it? I remember saying that they were preachy. I remember saying that they forced their views. I remember saying that they had no sense of humour. And that, I mean, sometimes, right? No, we're good, we're fine. But you know, I think that's really interesting to me, because I feel guilty about it. But do you know what else that highlights to me? Similar to how when I was 12 and I said that, I wasn't saying these things because I'd ever met a vegan who was like that. I hadn't. But that's what I was told to think about vegans. That's how I was told to feel about them. Even as a vegetarian, I believed that because that's what the media told me and what I saw online and what everyone was saying vegans were like. And I thought, my goodness, you know, no wonder people have these reputations about us. I used to have the same reputations about us for no reason. Isn't that crazy? That the way the media portrays us is really, really powerful in determining how people view us. And so I viewed us that way for about 8 months. And then my girlfriend at the time, she's always far ahead of me in every way. Like, she was saying, we should watch this documentary called Earthlings. And I said to her, there is no way that I'm going to watch this documentary. She said, why not? And I said, well, because this is a bad film, right? It chooses extreme examples. It's filmed by Peter, first and foremost, right, some of it. So it's just bad examples. It's not truly representative. There's just one bad farm, one bad farmer, all of these things that we hear all the time. And one day, she knows my Achilles heel, right? We've been together for a long time, so she knows me very well. And she knows that I'm really lazy in the mornings and I hate getting out of bed. So one morning, she got the laptop and she was like, we're going to watch the documentary. You can either get out of bed or watch it. And I was like, oh, it's like, you're good, you know. So I watched it. Needless to say, about 90 minutes later, I was not in a particularly great state. Crying, really devastated, upset. And I had a little hamster at the time called Rupert, who I loved very dearly, Rupert the hamster. He was my little companion. He was probably the first little companion animal I'd ever had. I wasn't raised with animals. We never had dogs, cats, anything, anyone. And so Rupert the hamster was the first animal I had in my home. And so anyway, I found quite an attachment with him. And I remember after seeing the film, I thought I'd go spend some time with Rupert the hamster, because he always made me feel happy. Like, he loved broccoli. So if I ever felt sad, I'd give Rupert broccoli, and he was like the happiest hamster who had ever lived. Right? So I thought, you know what? I'm feeling a bit sad. I'm going to selfishly give Rupert some broccoli to make myself feel better. So I get Rupert out, and he's sat on my hands, and he's munching away on broccoli. And again, I look at him, and I'm like, gosh, Rupert has such a little personality about him, right? Like, there's so much about him that makes him unique. So he loved broccoli, and he didn't like kale very much. He was not a fan of kale, right? If you gave him kale and it was the only thing, he would eat it. But he would look at you and he'd be like, really? Ed, you know, where's that broccoli? I'm sorry, Rupert, we've run out, you've eaten it all, there's kale. Right. But in that moment, I'm thinking, gosh, there's so much about him. Also, Rupert the hamster was a really lazy hamster. Like, he was possibly the laziest hamster who's ever lived. And I'm not even joking. Like, with hamsters, they're supposed to run on wheels, aren't they? Or you get them a ball and they, like, run around in the ball. Well, Rupert wouldn't run anywhere. I bought him a wheel. I think he tried it once and then decided it wasn't for him. And, like, for 2.5 years, he never used it again. I couldn't believe it. And I bought him a ball thinking that would do the trick and he would run around. And every time I put him in the ball, he would sit there and take the food from his cheeks and just eat. He was so lazy, I couldn't believe it. I thought, Rupert, he lived a long life. I think it's probably because of all the broccoli. It certainly wasn't because he was exercising. I think he'd probably still be alive today if he did some running, but no. Anyway, so I'm looking at Rupert thinking so much is about, he's got so much about him. And then I had this dawning, if Rupert's like this, then the pigs, cows, chickens, goats, sheep, even the marine animals, they have these traits and qualities about them as well. And that was that for me. That was what pushed me into veganism. Just thinking like how hypocritical it was for me to be like, oh, Rupert's amazing. I would never let anyone hurt Rupert. But then going to the shop and paying for animals who are identical in every way that matters to have the things that I would never want done to Rupert done to them. Just didn't make sense. So that was the push to veganism. Now I was vegan for probably about a year or so before I really started talking about it. I was a very quiet vegan. I didn't want to be labelled as preachy. It was really important to me that I didn't be labelled as preachy. I don't so much anymore, right? But at the time I was quite conscious of how people viewed me. And so I was really worried that people would see me as being militant because that's how I used to view vegans. Obviously I do not care about that anymore. Like, I'm happy with labels now, but that first year was quite a big time. And so I was at university, and so I'd go into uni and eat lentils and hummus and not say a word to my friends. Nothing. Now these were the vegetarian friends, but they were also friends that said a lot about climate change. They did a lot of talking about these issues. We all did. And then one day I saw Cowspiracy on Netflix, and that was what spurred me on to start talking about these issues. I thought, my friends, they're into the environment, like, I'll go into university, I'll tell them to watch Cowspiracy, they'll watch it, and everything will be fantastic, right? We'll be one big vegan family, right? It's just that naivety, right? Didn't happen, right? Never does. So, well, never as easy as that. So, I go into university, and I'm like, you guys, right? There's this documentary on Netflix, it's called Cowspiracy, it's about how the environment is impacted by us eating animal products, go home and watch it. And they look at me like I'm crazy. They really did. And this one girl called Rihanna, she came over to me and she did this really annoying thing. We probably all heard it. She went, Ed, I think it's fantastic you're vegan. I really respect that you're vegan. You know what? Do you know what I think is wonderful? That we live in a world where you've made that personal choice to be vegan. Right? And she says, but the thing is, Ed, it's a bit hypocritical of you to talk about the environment because you eat soya products and soya farming is destroying the environment. And I had no idea what to say to her. Like, I had no idea. I don't think it's mentioned in Cowspiracy. I just didn't know. And so I remember looking at her and being completely perplexed, completely confused. The first time I'd actually started speaking about it, someone said something to me that I had no idea how to respond. It made me feel a bit embarrassed. But she looked at me and she had this face, and it was like just pure smugness. When someone looks at you and they're so pleased with themselves, right? And it just makes you it makes you to shower, you feel so icky, right? That's the look she gave me. Fine about it. In fact, she'd feel better than she did beforehand. And that didn't sit well with me. And so I went home that day and I Googled, is soya farming bad for the environment? As we all know, it's terrible. But because we feed 75 to 80% of it to animals, right? And I thought, if I'd known that, I could have said that to her, and then she would have had to admit that she was wrong, right? She'd have said, Ed, yeah, you're right, I'm vegan now. Because I'd have used her logic against her. She wouldn't have done it, not a chance, right? But that got me thinking. And so that was when I started trying to learn and teach myself, because I realised that as soon as I started talking, this is what happens. And so I had to be prepared for this. Because if I wanted to talk about these issues, then I had to be prepared to talk about these issues. I came across like an analogy. And the analogy goes, that was a mouthful, wasn't it? An analogy. And the analogy goes that there's a blind person walking down the road. And now at the end of the road, there's a hole. And on the other side of the road is a person who can see. Now the person who can see is watching the blind person walk towards the hole. And so if the blind person falls into the hole, it's the fault of the person who can see but says nothing. Mm-hmm. I thought, wow, isn't that remarkable? Because we're the ones who know, right? We do see the trucks on the streets. We do know what happens to animals. We're aware of the damage it causes to our planet. And we're aware of the fact that these animals, as we can hear now, are incredible, beautiful creatures that deserve their right to life. But other people aren't aware of that. They're still blinded by the systems that we were all blinded in at some point. And so if people keep doing what they do, causing suffering, causing degradation, and we don't do anything about it, it's actually our fault if those things continue. Because it's not the fault of the people who can't see what they're doing, or who live unconsciously. It's not the fault of the people who've never been given a chance to see the other side of the story. It's our fault if these things continue. And so we have a responsibility to actually do everything that we can, because whilst we are the ones who see, we're the ones who have to stop it. That's a hard thing it's a hard pill to swallow. It is, right? Because we're not the ones participating in the violence anymore. But non-participation doesn't stop the violence if others are still continuing to perpetuate the violence. To be a bystander to violence whilst allowing others to continue is still to be complicit in that violence. Let's say that we're walking home and someone is, someone's beating a dog, right? We don't just watch it and say, I'm not going to take part in it, and then carry on going. We watch it and say, I'm not going to take part in it, and I'm going to stop you. Because that's the morally right thing to do. Because veganism is non-participation, right? It's not taking part in an action. But vegan activism is the next step. It's not only not participating, it's actively intervening whilst others do the bad things. And that's why that's the moral baseline. Because we wouldn't just see that in the street and allow it to happen. So nor should we allow it to happen behind walls, where it's happening every day, and we just don't see it. That's the really important thing. But when I started talking to people, I didn't do it in a very good way. Oh, no. No, I didn't. I took out that anger and frustration I had, and I used conversations as like a form of catharsis, so like a release, you know? You feel pent up, you're frustrated, maybe a bit disillusioned, maybe a little bit misanthropic, and so when you have conversations with people, you use that as a way to channel that and express yourself in a way that makes you feel good, but doesn't always help. That's what I did. And so I remember right at the beginning, I had a conversation with two South African guys. These South African guys said to me, well, you know, I think it's okay to kill an animal if it's done humanely. I said to them, well, tell me how you kill an animal humanely. And they said, well, you put electricity through their head and then you kill them. And I said to him, how would you like it if I took your mum and put electricity through her head and then cut her throat? Which I actually think is a fair statement. Like, I think that's a fair question to ask in a way. But at the same time, it's not an appropriate one in effectiveness. And also the way I said it. I have this thing, right? And you can see it in some videos of mine, where if I get angry, I start to point, right? It's like my one little thing, right? And so so there's a few videos of me where I'm doing this. It's normally with farmers where it starts to go. And so I have to keep reminding myself to tuck my finger away, because it's like almost like a gun, isn't it? Like, you know, yeah, like I'm in a spaghetti western or something, right? But no, so I have to do that. But in this video, I'm kind of like pointing quite a lot, and I'm using quite aggressive language, and that was the end of the conversation. Like, it shut it down straight away. From that point on, there was no chance of me actually getting anywhere with them. I'd said the wrong thing in a very aggressive way, using poor body language, and it shut the conversation down. Afterwards, they told me they were very unhappy. And I know that they left that conversation having a worse view of veganism than they did when we started the conversation. And so I said to myself, well, if I'm going out here to talk to people to try and encourage them to go vegan, and they're leaving conversations with me further away from that, then the best thing is for me not to do anything then, right? Because I'm actually doing a disservice to the cause that I'm supposed to be promoting. And that wasn't good. That's not good. And so we have to be very mindful, don't we, of how we act and the activism we do and how we approach the situations we're in. Because if we're going into something and the consequence of what we do is the opposite of what we want to achieve, then something's fundamentally going wrong. And so I had to sit down with myself and have a tough conversation. And that conversation was like, if you're serious about this, then you need to do something different. And that means maybe going against what you want to do in that moment and understanding that what you want to do isn't always the most effective thing to do. And so I started learning more. So it wasn't just about knowing how to respond in terms of the excuses. It was about learning how to actually say them to people and how to talk to people and how to act and the different things to do. And so the finger was a big one, right? Keep that finger tucked away, because body language is so important, isn't it? So important. And so how we talk to people is not just about what we say, but how we say it, because people pick up on our body language. And so we should be confident. We should be, because the more I learn, I'm sure it's the same for you guys, the more I feel confident about veganism. Like, there's a thing that you can do when you do like debating things in like university or whatever. You actually have to debate the opposite of what you believe. So let's say for us, obviously we believe in veganism. well, we don't believe in it. It's objectively true, right? So then what you do is you take that, but you have to debate the opposite of it. And so then what we have to do is we have to debate against veganism. Now that sounds like a tricky thing to do. It's obviously tricky, it's impossible. But at the same time, it's a really powerful thing to do. Because it means you get to know the arguments that people want to use. And it also makes you realise how silly that they are. Right? Do you know what? I don't know. I've been doing some research, right? I'm doing a Google Talk next week, and this Google Talk is about the environment. Now there's this one guy, I don't know if anyone's heard of him, he's called Alan Savory. Has anyone heard of Alan Savory? Oh good, don't Google him. Don't do it yourself. I know he's this guy who believes that grazing animals is the best thing for the planet. But I thought, you know what I should do? I should look into his arguments, because I should try and understand what he's saying. And so last night I spent several hours reading him and trying to research his arguments. And afterwards I looked at my girlfriend and I said, oh, I feel so good. She was like, why? I went, because I just read one of the most vocal people against veganism, and his arguments are complete nonsense, and there's no scientific backing for them at all. And she's like, oh, okay. And I was like, this is great. This is amazing. I feel even better now, because the more we learn, the more we realise that actually there is no argument. Not from a moral perspective, not from an environmental perspective, not from a health perspective either. There's no argument against what we do and what it is that we're asking others to think about. And so that's what caused me to change. Reading that, learning how to talk to people better, and in a way that maybe didn't cause so many problems. Now, I don't know, we've heard of Dr. Melanie Joy, right? We know Melanie Joy.
Yeah.
She's tremendous, right? Clinical psychologist. And so she deals with the reason why people do what they do. Now, I saw this video called The Secret Reason We Eat Meat. And the first thing I did with it after I'd watched it is I sent it to my parents. In fact, this is probably the first form of activism, and I'm going to use this word so loosely that I ever did. Email my parents. I think to this day it's still the scariest thing I've ever done as well. I always say I would much rather talk to 10 dairy farmers than my mother about veganism, and I still stand by that. So I sent my parents both an email. They're both divorced and remarried, so I've got 2 step parents as well. So I sent one to my dad and one to my mum, and I was like, oh hey dad, hey mum. Just to let you know, well, as you already know, I'm vegan. They know I was vegan. I said, I'm vegan, but I've never told you the reason why I'm vegan. So I just thought I'd take the time now to give you a little explanation. So I did a paragraph about the environment, a paragraph about health, and then a big chunk about the ethics at the bottom, and then a little video, The Secret Reason We Eat Meat by Melanie Joy. And I thought, this is it. There's no way they can argue against it. Bingo, vegan family. This was 4 years ago, still waiting. And probably like most of us are, right? Yeah, parents, right? You can't pick your parents, can you? No, they're wonderful people. Right, but anyway, some days. My dad didn't reply to me. My dad did not reply to the message at all. And my mum replied to me. She said 2 things. The first thing she said is that God put animals on this planet for us to eat. And I thought, that's strange, that. My mum's not religious. How about that, right? She doesn't go to church. She doesn't read the Bible. I'm not baptised. Right? But I think my mum is a little bit religious. And what I mean by that is she's religious for safety reasons. So if it's true, she can go, oh, didn't say I didn't believe in you, just a little bit. So I think she's playing her cards quite close to her chest. But the second thing she said to me was that I was going to die from synthetic proteins. Synthetic proteins, right? I remember reading that and just being completely gobsmacked. To this day, I'm still trying to work out what a synthetic protein is. I'm wandering around the supermarket looking for them. I'm actually a bit worried about them, they're out to get me, so I'm keeping a watchful eye where they are. But to this day, I still seem alright. And at the time, that really made me upset. I was actually very angry about it. Really, I was so upset by it. But I've learnt, I think, to maybe see why people say the things they do. And so let's say we're doing a cube, let's say we're at a vigil, we're doing some form of activism. Someone says something, maybe someone walks past, we've all had this happen, I'm sure. Someone walks past and they go, I love bacon, or I love steak, and they just keep walking, don't they, right? That's the only input that they have, is to shout something, and they just keep going. And the automatic reaction is to feel very, very angry about that. I have reacted in bad ways before. Someone once said, "Oh, I love bacon" to me, and I said, "I hope you love chemotherapy too, right?" Don't ever do that. Don't do that. Don't do it. It's not right. Okay? But that's the reaction it brings out of us, isn't it? It's like that reaction of like saying, I want to, an eye for an eye. You said something horrible to me. I want to say something horrible back to you, because how could you say something that's so insensitive, so cruel, and just so unintelligent? I think it was her way of saying that actually she's worried. Because remember, my mum told me I needed meat for protein. So when I went vegetarian, she was probably like, oh, he's still going to eat lots of cheese and eat eggs. So that's fine. But then I go vegan, and my mum's like, she doesn't understand. She has no idea. To her, she's like, this is crazy. Like, how could you do that? You're going to be ill. How are you going to get your protein? Or how are you going to get your calcium? So it was upsetting and it hurt me. But actually, when I reflect on it, I understand why she said that, because actually, it didn't specifically just come from a place of trying to be hurtful. It came from a place of probably worry. Now, this is the thing about parents, and this is a generalization. I'm only talking about my parents, of course. I can't speak on behalf of everyone's parents. But my parents wanted to raise me with good values. You know, they're good people. You know, they're good parents. And so they didn't want me to be raised with bad values, bad morals, whatever that looks like to them. So they tried to raise me to be a good person in their eyes. And so when I go vegan, and the reason I'm vegan is for ethical reasons, and I say, look, the reason I've done this is because it's immoral for us to use animals. I'm saying two things. The first thing I'm saying is that she lives in an immoral way, which is hard for someone to hear. But even worse, I'm saying that she raised me to have immoral values. Now, I think for any parent to listen to their child, tell them they've gone vegan, and then actually want to even just think about it for a second, requires a huge amount of humility and respect, because it's an acknowledgement that you've raised your children with bad morals, or at least, you know, that side of the morals being bad. And so I think for many parents, that's why our parents can shut us down and not want to listen to us, because it's an acceptance within themselves that not only are they doing something wrong, but they've raised us to do something that goes against how we feel and the morals that we all have within us as well. And so I understand that now. And this is another thing, when people say these things on the street and we want to react angrily, I think it's actually better to feel sorry for these people, because people are saying these things. Like, let's say we know the person that says, oh, I love bacon. We can think of the person in our head. That's some masculine type, right? I say masculine loosely. Some guy who wants to be masculine. What I mean by wants to be masculine is there is a massive irony when people say they eat meat to be masculine. There's a massive irony, because actually it's those who are most fragile in their masculinity that feel they have to stamp their masculinity by hurting others to eat meat. Like, it's a paradox, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. Oh, you eat meat to be a man. Well, why do you need to eat meat to feel like a man? Like, it shows how fragile you are. But that's the person I'm thinking of, right? That's the person. And so, but then we can understand how they've got to that point, right? Let's say they're with a few friends, right? They want to impress their friends. So they say something that they're going to get a laugh. It's going to make them seem impressive, make them seem funny. They say it because they've seen something that's made them feel a certain way. Maybe they've seen footage of pigs in gas chambers, whatever it might be. And they have a reaction to that. And so the reaction that they have is then suppressed, and they then react in the most hurtful way possible to make themselves feel better about it. I'm going to use my mum as another example of this. I run a vegan restaurant with a few other people in London called Unity Diner. My mum came to visit just before I started travelling, and I took her for lunch there. And she sat there, and at one point, I'm not making this up, I swear it's true, I could see 2 tears forming in her eyes, right? She didn't say a word to me about it. She didn't say, oh, this is great, nothing. Like, she's quite closed off. But I could see 2 tears forming, and then they were gone, right? And then literally about a minute later, she said to me, out of the blue, for no reason, she said, I'm never going to be vegan, you know. Just completely out of the blue. And I said, Mum, I didn't ask you about it, you know? She was like, yeah, I just thought I should tell you. And I realised, I think the reason she did that was because she was sat there, and then maybe, because she'd had a nice lunch, she said she liked it, so, you know, vegan food tastes good, right? She didn't realise that. She was sat there, and she saw all these other people, all these vegans, you know, vegan friends that have, whatever. She's feeling it, she's feeling something. And then because she's feeling something that's quite difficult to process, maybe it's pride, maybe it's guilt, who knows, she then reacts in a really painful way to try and distance herself from that emotion as far as she possibly can. It's like a defence mechanism, isn't it? And I think it's the same for people that often try and say hurtful things. It's a way of them dealing with guilt. because a lot of us aren't very emotionally mature, we find it difficult to feel these emotions. And so instead we react in a terrible way so we can distance ourselves from it. And so if someone says, well, I love the taste of this, or I like this, or I hate vegans, it's like a way of taking themselves out of having to process the emotion that they feel, right? Like we laugh at things because it makes us feel better. I saw a film called Food Inc. when I used to eat meat. And the film's it's not a fantastic film, but there is a lot of stuff about chicken farming in there. And afterwards I turned to my girlfriend and I said, oh, I really want a chicken burger now, right? And the reason I said that was because after the film I was thinking about it. And so I wanted to say something that took me as far away from that as possible, and so we could laugh and then be like, oh yeah, rubbish, right? Because I was actually feeling something about it. And so I think that that's the thing to bear in mind. Good people do bad things and say bad things, but good people aren't wholly bad, and bad people aren't always wholly... Hang on. Bad people can do good things, and good people can do bad things. It's not always as black and white, as binary as sometimes we think it is. That humbled me a lot. And so when I started to think about that in a way, I started to have more productive conversations to see that behind the excuses people use is a backlog of reasons that they do it. I really recommend checking out Melanie Joy's book. It's called Beyond Diets. Beyond Diets? Beyond Beliefs.
Beyond Beliefs.
Beyond Beliefs. I always get it wrong. I always recommend it and I never even know what it is. So I definitely took that one in. No, it is good. But I don't want to lecture you about that too much. I don't want to be condescending in that sense. But what I think is really important to know, right, is we all feel that responsibility, don't we? Like we all do. Like we all do things in varying degrees in different ways. Right? And then there is not one size fits all to the way that we can be activists and the way we can talk about these issues. It's not as simple as saying this way and that way or this way. Like we need to do a whole host of different things. Now, of course, some things need to be thought of differently than others. And some forms of activism are more effective than other forms of activism. That's true. So we have to be reflective on the way that we approach and the things that we do. But the most important thing is that we do something, we do it regularly, and we do a variety. Because we have to keep doing as much as we possibly can. Let's think of this is nerdy, right? In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, right? You know, before they get into it, there's like this big dog and it's got the dog's got 3 heads, right? And so think of animal agriculture as like this big beast that has many heads, right? And so to slay the beast, you've got to cut off all the different heads, right? And so that requires lots of different approaches and lots of different tactics to do it. But you have to be constantly doing something. And here's another thing. We can't afford to do something for a short period of time. Like 6 months, a year, it feels like a long time, but it's not. What we are facing is going to take decades to overcome, realistically. Like I reckon that the rest of us are going to have to spend our entire lives doing what we're doing now. In a sense of talking about this, advocating, getting out there and having these conversations. It's not something that we can just be done with in a couple of years. And so we have to make sure that we're in this for the long haul, right? It's not just something we can dip our toes in and out of. This is something that's going to take up huge amounts of our life. But that's the point, isn't it? It's not just about our lives, right? None of us want to do the things that we do, really. Like, we don't want to have to go and have conversations with people. We don't want to have to go and put ourselves in situations that make us feel sad and uncomfortable, sometimes hopeless, sometimes full of despair. But that's not the point, right? The point isn't we don't do these things to make us feel a certain way. The great thing is, when we have conversations, we can feel amazing afterwards. And we can feel so inspired and empowered because we're bringing about positive change. And nothing feels better than bringing positive change to others as well. It's a wonderfully rewarding experience. But at the same time, it's not always going to be easy. Never. It's definitely not going to be easy. But we have to keep going with it. Because if we stop, then the blind people keep walking towards that hole, right? So we have to keep being motivated. Now, I love coming to sanctuaries, but it's bittersweet. Terribly bittersweet, right? How wonderful is it to spend time with these animals who live wonderful, happy lives now? But then we hear about where they've come from. Or we think about the trillions of others who will live a life that these ones will never get to live. Or live a life that they'll never be able to experience happiness like these ones do. They live a life of suffering and pain. It always reminds me when I come to sanctuaries. You look at the happy animals, and there's always that thought in the back of your head of all the others that will never be happy. Ever. Now the reality is we can't necessarily do anything to save a lot of those animals. But we can save many in the future. We can save many from having to live the lives that the billions right now currently do. And that's why we do what we do. To try and foster a good world for the future. For humans, but for non-humans as well. I was chatting with Luna, my girlfriend, yesterday. I was saying, don't you think it's remarkable to think of the privileges that we have in society now? A lot of those privileges weren't just granted to, well, they were for some people, me maybe, but for a lot of people they weren't granted. They were fought for. And because of what other people did in our past, we now get to reap the rewards of those sacrifices. And so in the future, hopefully, others will be able to reap the rewards of what we do with our lives. Doesn't mean that we have to live a truly horrible life, right? Because the other side to that is we have to look after ourselves, don't we? Because I said it's a long fight that we have. And I think using the word fight's acceptable, you know? It is a fight. It doesn't mean it's a fight of violence, well, at least not on our behalf, it's not, although undeniably what we're up against is inherently extremely violent. But at the same time, it's a fight. But it's not a fight against individuals. It's a fight against mindsets, isn't it? It's a fight against ignorance, mostly. A fight against people that just simply don't know. And that's what we have to bear in mind. The antidote to ignorance is very simple. It's education and awareness, right? And that's what we need to do. Inform people, educate them, show them, sometimes make them listen, make them watch in a way that says we go out there on the streets, we screen it for people so they have to see these things. And then over time, hopefully that awareness starts to dissolve that ignorance. But we do have to take time to look after ourselves. And this is something that I've been starting to come to terms with, especially in the past year. You do have to take time to look after yourself in some way. What I mean by that is, do something you enjoy. Like, do you like watching films? Watch some films. Find the guiltiest pleasure you have, alright? There's nothing wrong with watching Love Actually at Christmas time. Right? At least that's what I'm trying to tell myself, okay? Because I probably will watch it over Christmas. Right? There's nothing wrong with taking time out to do things that make you feel happy. And that's really important. Because we can't beat ourselves up either. Do you know what I think is really tricky when we're activists? Is if sometimes we just sit and we put a film on, right? Or we, I don't know, go out for a few drinks or whatever, like go out to a gig, whatever you like doing. And then sometimes you just have this feeling, don't you? Why do I deserve to be happy right now? And that's a really bad attitude to have. We don't have to punish ourselves to experience happiness. We should take time to look after ourselves. It's the two things. Responsibility and accountability. And this is the very fine line we have to tread. Holding ourselves responsible, but also accountable. And what I mean by that is we, and only we, have a responsibility to look after ourselves. Those around us will help us and support us in communities, but we have a responsibility to make sure that we're in this for the long haul. But we also have that accountability that says, just because we don't want to do something, doesn't mean we shouldn't. Right? We have to be accountable and responsible. Take ownership of our own lives, take ownership of our own bodies, but also take ownership of the duties that we have to bring about positive change. And if we can find that balance, I don't think anyone can truly find that balance, right? If we can find that balance, we can make ourselves more sustainable. Because burnout and these things are real. And having conversations about them is important. Responsibility and accountability. So make time for things you enjoy as well, and don't punish yourself for doing those things. But at the same time, make sure we hold ourselves accountable to do as much as we possibly can in the time that we have to do it. Now, we've all probably seen footage. I told you I talked for a while, right? So just give me a few more minutes and then we'll do some questions. We definitely are aware of what's happening. We know these things, don't we? And to us that makes us feel sad. If we ever doubt what we can achieve or accomplish, put ourselves in those positions of others. And then we have to say to ourselves, what would we want to do if we were in their position? To me, that's one of the most powerful things, powerful reminders that we can have. When we think about why it is that we're doing what we do, and sometimes that means we have to remind ourselves. Sometimes that reminder could be coming to a sanctuary. That reminder could be watching that new investigation that's been released. That reminder could be reminding ourselves by watching documentaries we've seen before. Remind ourselves. On those days where we feel down, it's okay to feel that way. On those days where we feel good, it's okay to feel that way. Use those emotions to spur us to keep doing more and more. And if at any time we doubt what we can achieve or what we can do, think about the reason that we do it. We are our own biggest enemies. Self-doubt is the most crippling of things. It's worse than people's judgments. It's worse than people's words. We are our own worst enemies in what we can achieve as individuals. And so always believe in what you can do. And believe that you have the power to create instrumental change. Because every conversation, every event, every share on Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is, can bring about a substantial amount of change. Don't doubt what you can do, and don't doubt the abilities that you have for a second. Because each and every one of us is as vital as the next person in bringing about real significant change. And every time we speak up, we do several different things. But the most important thing we do is we normalize the topic that we're talking about. And normalizing it is one of the best things we can do, and it's one of the simplest things that we can do. Let's think about when we were in like small communities, like we were like more like tribal beings back before we had civilization. We lived in small little communities. Now there was no prisons, there was no jails. If you did something wrong, you would be kicked out of the community. Ostracized, right? Removed. That was your punishment. And so as humans, we're reliant on being part of what everyone else is doing. Because historically, we relied on it for survival. We feel safe when we're around other people. We feel safe when we're doing what everyone else is doing. And so like in the modern world, to do something different is almost to take yourself out of what everyone else is doing. It's like a form of self-ostracization. And so one of the biggest drawbacks for people wanting to try veganism is they're scared that they'll be different to everyone else, that they'll seem different, they'll be mocked, they'll be teased, and they have unconscious fears about what that means to them. So every time that we normalize it, every time we wear vegan t-shirts, buy vegan food, talk about veganism, we make it seem more accessible and normal every single time. So it doesn't matter. Everything we do brings about significant impact. It can be very subtle. It can also be very big as well, by doing things like turning people vegan, by creating vegan options. And Phil's my man this week. Like I went and spoke at the school that Phil teaches in, and what you've done, Phil, is incredible. Like the way that you've inspired people to talk about veganism there, the fact you got me in there, the fact there's vegan options that are labelled every single day. One person, and a huge amount of difference. Now I'm sure you've all done amazing things just like Phil, but I know Phil. Well, I do anyway. So that's what we can achieve as individuals, huge amounts of different things. So believe in yourself, take every opportunity you have, and if you doubt yourself, remember why. Remember why you do what you do. I had an experience where I visited a dairy farm. I visited a few now, but this was the first time I visited a dairy farm. And I remember we saw a calf being taken away from their mother, because the farmer knew we were there, and he wasn't bothered about us being there, so he was happy for us to be there. And so we followed as this happened, and we filmed and we watched. And I remember watching the mother as her baby was taken away from her. And I remember looking into her eyes, and that was huge, because their eyes tell everything about me. When you look into an animal's eyes, human or non-human, you see so much about them, just from recognizing that behind those eyes is an intricate world. Do you know what sometimes overwhelms me? Sometimes I'll be in a supermarket and I'll see all these other people, and I think to myself, all of these other people in front of me have their own lives, right? Isn't that like all of you have your own, like to me that is mind-blowing. You have your own feelings, things that make you happy, things you feel insecure about, things that make you anxious, things that make you delighted, things that make you sad, things that you love. To think about that, history, future, aspirations, like all of these things. To think that we all have this, and life is so complicated and so wonderfully mysterious, is mind-blowing to me. And then you look into their eyes, and you realise the exact same thing is happening with behind their eyes as well. Feelings, thoughts, dreams, aspirations, and they may be simplistic to us, but what relevance does that have? It's all about perspective and relativity. And to them, their life is as mysterious and bemusing as I'm sure our life is to us. And I looked into her eyes and I saw so much in that moment. The pain, the fear, the anguish, the terror. And then I went and saw where her baby was. I'd been put in this little pen, solitary confinement pen, literal metal cage, an actual prison. And to think that I could get up and leave at any point, but they would be there forever, and she would be impregnated again and again, and have the same thing happen over and over. It might have been her first time, it might have been her fourth time. But to think that it happens over and over, and the fear that they all experience, and yet behind those eyes is that someone, I just could not handle that. I just couldn't handle that for a moment. And so I said to myself, I made a promise. And I said to myself that if I ever for a second even contemplate the notion that I shouldn't do this anymore, I will think about that moment. And let's be real, those animals may not be alive today, but others exactly the same of them are alive. And I owe it to them to put away any of that self-doubt, To put away any of that egoic feeling of I don't want to, or not today, or this isn't for me, or this is hard, or someone said this to me, and say that's not good enough to use as a reason to not actually fight on behalf of these other sentient beings. And bigger than that, the future for our own species, well, everything is on the line. Everything is on the line. Everything. It couldn't be bigger, the stakes couldn't be higher than they actually are. It couldn't be any bigger in size than it actually is. And if we don't do something about it, it will be too late. It's already too late for those animals, but it'll be too late for the others. It will be too late for us to think if we don't do something every day from this moment on, then in the future we turn to look back at our lives. What if our children or our grandchildren say, why didn't you do more? What will we say to them? Oh, I just wasn't sure. What? It's not good enough. It's not good enough. We have to do everything that we can, all the time, as much as we possibly can, and realise that life is a privilege and a gift. And we've been fortunate enough to be born into the bodies that we're born into. We should be very grateful for that. The chance of being born into the bodies we're born into, we have a much higher chance of being born into the trillions of bodies who are exploited every single year. And if we were, what would we want from those who were born into the bodies that we've been born into to do for us? We'd want them to do something, anything. And so this is not me telling you what you should do. It's just me asking you, please, keep going. Don't ever stop. Don't doubt yourself, not for a second. Doubt is the enemy. Don't doubt yourself. If you feel lonely, then turn to others around you. Turn to your community. Talk to each other. Express how you feel. Don't judge. Don't look down. Express and feel grateful for those around you, and feel grateful for the opportunity that you have to create a meaningful impact on this world, because we are the ones who can create a meaningful impact. And if we don't, no one else will. Okay. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
When I do these talks, I don't do talks to vegans that much anymore. Like in the past year or so, I don't do that many. And so when I do, I'm talking to myself, right? Like I am as much a part of the audience as you guys are, in the sense I'm saying these things to me, to say, Ed, get over it, right? Get on with it, you know? So I'm talking to me as well.
Story about meeting those two South African guys, and you had this more aggressive discussion with him, or with them.
Yeah.
You thought that you probably pushed them away from veganism. I would give you the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Because my first connection that I had was with a very empathetic woman.
Yeah.
And I pushed veganism away. And the second person I was in contact with, put it in my face, was Vegan Gaines.
Oh yeah.
And Vegan Gaines is so easy to hate when you're an omnivore.
That's true.
And he stuck with me. And I didn't like him, but I kept on watching him.
Yeah.
Because the problem was, he was so hard in my face, and I didn't like the way he was presenting it to me. But the fact that everything he was saying was true made me think so hard about all my choices. And it was only at the end of 2016 when I finally found people like you online, or James Aspie, people that were more compassionate, finally put the last drop in it. But I needed someone to slap me in the face.
Yeah.
I didn't need a hug from a vegan.
Right,
I just needed to punch me in the face and say, you did it.
True.
So, so if you meet an aggressive vegan once in a while, I think it's not bad for the movement at all.
Sure.
Because I think it takes both sides. If you take people that are straight up into your face and say, listen, what you're talking about is bullshit. And then the other guys that will sprinkle flowers and sugar all over it.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Thank you a cake, right? Please.
Sometimes peace and love and happiness is not the right message for everybody.
Well, I mean, I agree with that entirely. Yeah, by no means do I want to give you the impression that you have to talk to people in the way that I do at all.
I think it's a good balance.
I agree, balance is important.
It's always the receptor and the sender.
Yeah.
If you have someone that is a tough guy, then he'll probably also take a tough message.
Yeah, true.
And if you get someone that is maybe more compassionate and sensitive, then you also have to, choose different words and a different way of communication.
Yeah.
To achieve whatever you want to achieve.
Yeah.
It's like it's sales. It's sales.
Yeah, it is.
So
well, I mean, we are selling.
Finding out what your discussion partner needs to hear.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, that is. It is like a sales pitch, isn't it? But you need to find what it is that people get hooked onto, what aspect they like, and then you follow that and sell them that. But you're right. One thing that one of the most satisfying things that I get from people is when I get messages or from someone and they said, I started watching you because I hated you. and then I kept watching you and I realised you were right. I've had that a few times. I used to have this one guy, I don't know if he still comments, but he used to comment on all my videos and it was always like bad comments. bad comments. And then they started to change their tune a little bit, and it then went from like him hating me to saying, "You're right, but I still don't like you." Right? and then it went. I'm plant-based now, but I'll never call myself vegan, right? and then it was like, "Oh, you're right." So it's funny. People often hate watch other people, don't they? I know vegans probably do it with some non-vegan characters. Don't we watch stuff because we want to be like but actually, it can be quite good when people hate watch us, you know. That's why I was thinking, if this is another thing, right? Like, let's say you do share something online and you get bad comments. That's okay. That's good, right? Because if you were just getting positive comments, then you're stuck in these echo chambers. So the moment you start getting people going, "Oh, I think this is rubbish," blah blah, then you're doing good, right? Because then you're actually getting people to engage with it who aren't sympathetic. Who wouldn't normally. So I think that's really important. And even if people leave a bad comment, you are right. Even if people leave a bad comment, or let's say you leave a conversation and they do seem angry with you, often that anger, this is why it gets so complicated, because you can't always read it, can you? It's sometimes because, like I was saying, people have been forced to feel a certain way about something. And so getting angry is the easiest way to respond to something that makes you feel guilty. You get angry at the person who's made you feel that way. And so I think that you're right. And so if you share something or you have a conversation and someone gets a bit irate, you can diffuse that by how you act, but at the same time, it's not a bad thing if they do necessarily. You are right about that, and so yes, maybe I should be give myself more benefit of doubt. But I think you also get a feeling, don't you?
Maybe those two guys are vegan by now, just don't know it.
Gosh. Yeah, maybe. I'd like them to message if they weren't. Let me know. I'd feel much better if they did. But yeah, no, you are right. You are right. You never know. And this is another thing. Let's say you have conversations, or whatever. Your job isn't to turn someone vegan in that moment. Like that'd be amazing if you did. But if you set the goal as being, I'm going to talk to someone for 15 minutes, they're going to be vegan, then you're going to feel disappointed like 90% of the time, right? Because most people are not going to leave the conversation going, yeah, I'm vegan. You might get quite a lot who go, yeah, okay, I'll try it. But the thing that you really want is for someone to leave and say, oh, thanks for that. Or take a card from you. Like if you're an AV, like the end point of the conversation should be giving them a card. And if they accept the card, you've done a great job, right? Because if you set your goal as being, I have to turn someone vegan, then you're going to feel quite disempowered often. But if your job is, I'm going to make someone feel more positively about veganism and take a card with some information, or let me write some documentaries on their phone notes or whatever, then that's a much more aspirational, positive target to reach. And so, yeah, I think that's a good thing to mention. But they're not always going to go well, and that's another thing. Like, we don't always have great conversations. Sometimes you get someone who's just horrendous, someone who just doesn't want to hear it, someone who's nasty, passive-aggressive, rude, condescending, whatever. That's okay. Like, just brush yourself off. And also, we're not always going to know what to say to someone. Someone might say something to us, we might not know how to respond. It might be something we've not heard before. That's okay. Like, we're not going to know everything. What I dislike about non-vegan conversations, well, many things really, but one thing that really annoys me, right, is when you can have a half-hour conversation with someone, they could give you 45, 50 excuses. You could answer 49 of them perfectly. And if there's one thing that you don't know how to respond to, they go, oh, well, I told you it's a load of rubbish, right? They could think of something really obscure, couldn't they, right? And then if you're just like, well, I've not heard of that before, they go, ha-ha, right, got you. It's so annoying. It should be like an aggregate game, really, shouldn't it? Like, the more you get, the more convincing. But so yeah, we're not always going to know everything. If we don't know how to respond, go home, research it, and then come back and you'll be more prepared. I often get people that say things to me and I'm like, is that true? I've never heard this before. And then when you research it, then you're prepared for it next time. It's quite interesting. And I think that's an interesting thing. When we have conversations, it's a learning opportunity for us as well. I find that quite exciting to think, because activism is a journey. I don't like the journey word because it's so, I don't know. I don't like it when people say like vegan journey, or I'm on, because you hear people say that, don't you? They go, I'm on my personal journey. And that really annoys me, because it's like it removes responsibility, doesn't it? It's like, well, I'll get there when my journey reaches its end. It's like that. But we are all on a journey, in its most literal sense, right? And activism is no different. It's part of that. And the amazing thing about it is we're always learning, The older we get, the more we learn, and the more longer we're an activist, the more we learn as well. And that's kind of exciting to think that we keep educating ourselves, keep learning, keep getting better. You know, every time we make a mistake, we can improve. Every time we hear something, we can learn about it. I like that. That makes it exciting for me to think I can keep absorbing and stuff. So definitely that. Wow, not what you asked at all, is it? But just more of me talking, right? I told you I'm good at that. There you go. Yeah.
First of all, thank you a lot for this amazing talk.
Oh,
it inspired me a lot to continue with what I'm doing, and I'm pretty sure many people will agree on that as well. The point where you made me think the most was when you talked about how what we sometimes want to do might not be the thing that is the most effective for the movement.
Yes.
Because when I see, when I look in our community, in our activism scene, I see that the vast majority of what people are doing is focusing on the individual, like doing outreach activism, handing out flyers, going to street events, and trying to focus on single people and telling them, hey, we should go vegan. Yeah. Which is not bad in any way. I'm not excluding myself out of this. The majority of what I'm doing is outreach activism with individuals. Yet, this also means that the minority of the activism that is happening is focusing on the institutions. Let's say the governments, let's say the companies that are having a way bigger influence than every single person of us. I mean, maybe you've heard of this statistic that says that the 100 biggest companies produce 71% of the global greenhouse gases, which means if every one of us convinces 100 people to go vegan and not flying, that's still a tiny majority of what just one of these companies is doing, right?
Sure.
So, I don't know if you know Jake Conroy. He's doing videos on that as well and explaining that this focus on the individuals might not be the most effective thing. So what do you think about these issues? I mean, I'm not saying that we should exchange individual and focus on the institutions, but don't you also think that there should be a bigger shift towards the institutions?
I think there has to be both, doesn't there? I think you're right in the sense of, the problem is like when we, there's a couple of things, isn't there? With like institutions and corporations, it can be very demoralizing. And I think the thing about individual outreach is it can be quite empowering, you know, because you can see change. And I think you are right. You're definitely not wrong about that at all. It does get really tricky. Sometimes when people say about the 100 companies thing, that's true, but we also buy into those companies. And this is the thing, like people like, you know, Tyson and Cargill, and I don't know what the European equivalents might be. They're responsible for a huge amount of environmental problems and also, you know, billions of animal deaths. But they only do it because we buy it, and so it works in tandem. The difference, I think, with fossil fuels is a bit different because we are reliant. You know, we can't afford electric cars. Our energy isn't going to be, you know, 100% ethical, sustainable because we don't have those choices. So it's different. But with animals, there is more choice. We need both approaches. I think the problem when we targeting systems and corporations is the manner in which we do it. I'm a big fan of civil disobedience. A big fan of it. A big fan of direct action. I think it's essential. I think it needs to happen more, and I think it will. I think, you know, what XR have done in the UK and of course around the world is fantastic. Not without its flaws, of course, but the messaging, the ideas behind it is good. And Animal Rebellion, who are doing something similar now, I think it's really powerful. I think, but it's how you do it. And I think like sometimes civil disobedience can be done in a way that's really detrimental, and it can also be done in a way that's really positive. And so I'm not really giving you a very good answer, and I appreciate that it's not a particularly good answer, because I think that you are right, but I also think that it's really difficult to mobilize people to do it, because the advantages of it and benefits are less obvious, and it can take a lot longer. And I guess sometimes the changes that happen can feel so small, especially with governments, isn't it? It's like the changes that we would ask for are huge changes, because anything less we don't settle for, like welfare, you know, regulations we don't settle for. But when all these companies, and I'm thinking of like Mercy for Animals, who I think do great work, but the legislative change they implement is like happy eggs, you know, like cage-free eggs. And a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resource, a lot of energy goes into that. And the benefit of it is so small. And so that I find that quite demoralizing. And then with companies, it's a similar thing. It's like, you know, we have something in the UK that a lot of NGOs, animal NGOs, are campaigning for. It's called the Better Chicken Scheme, which means that broiler chickens, so meat chickens, will be given a little bit more space. I thought, I can't throw my weight behind that because I don't believe in it. So we're asking people to do something, and I think the only thing that we could ask for that bring about tangible change is civil disobedience. But then that's asking, it becomes really tricky, doesn't it? We need both things. There's no denying that. My views on companies and governments is they always rely on what the people are doing, and unless the people change, they won't change. Governments have never changed before the people forced them, mandated them through actions. And so you need to change public mindset and get people behind these issues. Like, we keep calling for things like a meat tax for the environment, but the government is not going to bring in a meat tax, not for a while, right? Because let's think about in Paris last year, the Gilets jaunes protests started because of something called the eco-fuel tax, right? And they started because it hurt people on low socioeconomic levels. It's a class problem. Those rich don't get affected by taxation, but those people who are poor do. And so it's not fair in the way it's distributed between people. But it caused huge amounts of civil unrest. But if everyone was thinking more proactively about the environmental measures, it could be more happily received. And so things like legislative change that we want is not going to be given unless there's people in society who are accepting of it. And I don't think people in society are yet. And so we have to influence the people to then influence the companies and governments. Ugh. But at the same time, you're right. Like it seems like a really long way. It's like taking the scenic route, when actually, if you could just get from A to B, it would be like legislative government change. But the prospect of that happening is slim. And to pour a lot of energy and resources into it, I think can cause more burnout because there's less positivity at the end of it. Maybe.
You were expressing my thoughts better than I could ever have. Yeah,
but it is really tricky. I constantly debate myself with this because, it's true. It's true. But at the same time, we think about companies now, and we don't like it. We don't like it. But Nestle having vegan burger, Tyson investing in Beyond Meat. And we think Tyson investing in Beyond Meat's a really bad thing, and it is, but through Tyson investing in Beyond Meat now have a much larger distribution than they ever could have. With contacts and networking they never would have had before. So it's like this double-edged sword where, you're.
There's no right answer to that, I know. I mean, I wasn't asking this to make this complicated. But it's thought is running in my head all the time, and I
mine
think
too.
The same, right?
Mine too. But it's a very important question. It's a challenge because when I talk about effective activism, it's very hard to quantify the effectiveness of activism. Like, is standing out on the street and doing AVs the most effective thing we could do? We can't quantify it. Yes, we have like a tally at the end, which gives us some idea. But what are we comparing that to? We just do what our gut tells us. And I think it is a fantastically effective form of activism. I was using that as an example, but I think it's perfect and wonderful. We should carry on doing it. That outreach, talking to people. But at the same time, is there other things we could be doing with our time that would be more effective? If we all went and chained on now, would that be more effective? Who knows? The consequence and reward, it's like risk and reward, isn't it? It's really hard to work out. You could do like, some civil disobedience is going to get you really good results, and some's going to get you bad results. Like, you get bad press, you get good press. How do you quantify the positives versus the negatives? Because you can never know. And that's really tricky. So I think we just lead with our gut and lead with our intuition, but we also lead with logic and an understanding of how the system works. Definitely guides us to understanding psychology and also how these systems are built and maintained. And for better or for worse, they are maintained through consumer habit. And so changing consumer choice can lead to dramatic change quickly as well. Anyway, if only there was an easy one to that.